So as a tech reviewer, I'm obviously someone who really enjoys technology, and that's one of the coolest things about working for Android Authority. I get to play with all sorts of really cool technology. Unfortunately, a lot of the time that technology is kind of boring. It's lots of squares with screens on them. There's not tons to get excited about. However, when I was sent the Doogee S90 to review, I knew that I was looking at something a little bit different. The first thing that clued me into that fact was the box, which was gigantic and had a drawer, and just assembling all the different parts that it came with, all the modules, I felt a bit like James Bond or some kind of super spy looking at all the stuff that Q had given me for my latest mission. So this is a much more exciting phone than most. Like a lot of more out there technology, the Doogee S90 began life on Kickstarter. That's where it got funded. It's massively exceeded its goal already by a huge margin, and it's still running, so if you want to get involved, you still can, and that's how to get hold of one of these as cheaply as possible. But should you get involved? Would you want to get hold of one of these? Well, that's what I'm going to be looking at here. So other than the fact that this device comes with lots of modules, lots of add-ons, things to lose if you're me, the other notable aspect of this device is its heft. This is a rugged device. It's supposed to be adaptable for adventuresome type. So if you go on lots of hikes, if you go rock climbing, if you go skiing, then this is the phone that you'll want to bring with you. That's the sales pitch. To that end, it's incredibly durable and it can withstand all sorts of attacks. It's waterproof, dust resistant, all that stuff that you'd expect. It's got bumpers around the edge, it's military spec, it can withstand being submerged in water 1.5 meters for 2 weeks apparently, which is quite impressive. It's got these old school flaps and it's thick and heavy. Unfortunately, it is only Gorilla Glass 4, which is already slightly out of date, so that's a bit disappointing. But other than that, this is a phone that should have a hard time destroying. So if you were to drop it in a puddle, or if you were to run over it with your push bike, then it should be fine. In theory, I did actually test it, did some slight drop testing, dropped it into some muddy puddles, and one of the buttons, which I'll come to in a moment, stopped working. And I don't know if that's because of me, or if it's because of a quality control issue, or what, but yeah, something to keep in mind. Despite being so thick and bulky, I do think it has its own kind of rugged charm. I don't actually hate the look of it. They've got some nice touches around. It's got this kind of hexagonal pattern, which kind of makes it look a bit futuristic. The screws that are visible look like they're meant to be there. And to be fair, if you're someone who needs a really rugged phone, chances are you're going to add a really thick case to it. In theory, this doesn't need a thick case. You might just want a screen protector. And so actually the difference in size might not be that noticeable if you're that audience. And this is a phone that really knows its audience and it's not for everyone, and that's fine. One other thing I'll say that I didn't really like about the design so much is the reflective screen, which obviously makes legibility in direct sunlight a bit difficult, which doesn't make a lot of sense for a device that you're supposed to be using outdoors. There's also no headphone jack, which kind of sucks, but you can understand why they omitted it. And opening up these flaps gets pretty old pretty fast. Other than the shininess, the LCD screen is nice and big, and its FHD+ is fine for media playback, and the sound's perfectly adequate as well. What's really cool is the number of buttons on this thing. Not only do you have your usual volume rocker and power button, but you also have a custom button which you can set to all sorts of different things. You can program single clicks, double clicks, long clicks. Like I say, mine stopped working, but in theory that's really good. And you get a camera button. So what's really good about that is that normally when you get a custom button, the first thing a lot of people are going to do is set it to launch the camera app. But because you've already got a camera button here, you can do all sorts of things with that, and that's going to be really useful if you are at the top of a mountain with thick gloves on, or if it's freezing cold and you don't want to use the screen. I would say though that this button is a little bit easy to hit by accident, and that can be a bit annoying, but I'm sure you'll get used to it over time. In general, this is a phone that does require some learning. You need to develop the muscle memory for it. In terms of specs, it's fairly middling, as you might expect. You get a Helio P60 chipset, you get 6 GB of RAM, 128 GB of storage, which is quite nice. And performance is fine for swiping through the UI, reading web pages, etc. And you can even do some light gaming. Something like PUBG ran just fine on medium settings. The one module I didn't get to try actually is a Gamepad module. I guess it wasn't ready at the time that they sent this out for the review. And it looks quite cool. It attaches on and lets you play with physical keys. However, given the chipset, it doesn't really make tons of sense, seeing as this isn't exactly a gaming phone, and at the same time it's a bit off-brand as far as I'm concerned. I mean, you're not going to be up a mountain playing PUBG, probably, so a bit random, but I guess why not? Other than durability, something else that's quite important for someone who's going on a hike or an adventure is the camera. Unfortunately, the performance of this camera is really fairly middling. You get a dual lens camera at the back. You can't do bokeh effects or anything like that with it. It's got an f2.0 aperture, which isn't particularly impressive, and performance is just really average and even poor in some cases. I mean, it takes photos of stuff, and indoors some photos come out okay. There's not much post-processing, they're a bit bland, but they'll do the job. However, when you take it outside, it really seems to struggle with exposure, even with the HDR mode on, which is off by default. So you get these white skies and these really bland looking scenes. Detail is a bit lacking, it seems to be over sharpened in some cases. Like I say, it's fine if you want to just take photos of your dog to upload to social media, but if you're an adventurer and you've just reached the summit of an amazing climb and you want to take out a camera and take a photo to capture that amazing moment, you're not going to want to do it on this one, which is a shame because that would have been an obvious match. As for the front-facing camera, it's an 8 megapixel camera, doesn't do anything fancy. It would have been so cool to have like a wide angle lens here so you could get yourself and your friends at the top of a mountain. In general, there's lots of missed opportunities and strange design decisions like the Gorilla Glass, like the reflective screen, like the lack of great front-facing camera, but it's not a highly expensive device, and considering everything you get, you can see why some corners had to be cut. The software experience is built on Android 8.1, but actually there is a fair amount of customization here, some of which is a hit and some of which is a miss. So you get gesture controls, which is really cool, so you can wake your phone by wiggling it, and you can launch apps by wiggling it, and that's really useful again if you've got thick gloves on. And you also get a bunch of custom apps, which is really cool. You get something called the tool bag, which basically gives you access to all sorts of things that take advantage of some of the unique sensors in here, like the barometer. So you can measure altitude, and you can measure gradients, and you can even use it for hanging a picture, which I think is quite cool. There's a compass in here, and that's all pretty neat. Unfortunately though, there are also some customizations I wasn't so keen on. For instance, like Samsung, you get a bunch of duplicate apps in here. It makes more sense from Samsung, being as Samsung is a massive company. I don't know why Doogee feels the need to give us their own browser, but it's there and you can't delete it. Bit annoying, not the end of the world. Or slightly more obtrusive perhaps is some of the aesthetic decisions, the design decisions around the UI. You get this kind of black, grey and gold color scheme, or bronze, which looks nice enough, but it's not so nice on those big skeuomorphic icons, which unfortunately are also present in the settings menu, so you can't get rid of them completely. Probably what you really want to hear about is those modules. So how are they? Are they worth it? Do they add much extra functionality? Well, if you go for the full caboodle, then in the box you get a wireless charger, which isn't a module but is a nice touch. You also get a puzzle, which is weird. But other than that, you get 4 modules, 3 of which I've been able to test. Walkie-Talkie, hello. Night vision camera, extra battery. Oh, it's an extra battery. And there's a gamepad that I haven't been able to test as well. And if you back this project on Kickstarter, you'll either be able to get the full kit with everything included, or you can buy just the phone and then optionally buy additional modules, just picking and choosing the ones that you need. The modules clip on and off really quickly using a magnet. There's no need to reboot the phone, and in theory it's a really cool concept. Extra battery. You already have in here a 5,000 mAh battery. It's actually 5,050, or that's a lot of juice. And then when you add this, you get an extra 5,000. And so with that clipped on, then in theory, you could go for a long camping trip, you could go for a long hike, and really not worry about having to plug in and charge anywhere, which is obviously really useful if you're the sort of person who does that kind of thing a lot. Then you get the walkie-talkie. The idea being, of course, if you're somewhere that doesn't get signal, or if you want to spare your data, then you can speak to someone else who's got another walkie-talkie. It doesn't have to be a Doogee, just as long as they're able to pick up the same frequency, which I don't know much about walkie-talkies, but that sounds good, I guess. And the last module was the one I was most excited about, and unfortunately the most disappointed with. In theory, this is an awesome idea. I'd love a night vision camera myself. However, its performance is really middling. The low light performance of the main camera is abysmal. You won't really be able to take any photos if it's even slightly dark. Add this on, and you get a significant upgrade to the clarity. Unfortunately, you can only take photos in 1080p, and there's a big fish eye effect. And so you think, well, that's pretty cool, until you compare it to something like the Note 9, and you realize that the Note 9 is able to take better low light photos with no gimmick, with no reduction in quality, with no fisheye lens, than this can with that attachment, rendering it almost completely useless, which is a big shame. I mean, it's a bit of fun, and if you want it, then sure, it'll upgrade the camera you have in here generally, but don't buy this thing because you want a night vision camera. Just don't. So on the whole, what do I make of the Doogee S90? Well, it's a really difficult one for me to review fairly because I had a ton of fun with it. Normally, when I'm reviewing a phone, I use 2 litmus tests to decide if I liked them or not. One is, how much am I looking forward to getting back to using my daily driver, the Note 9? And the other is, how sad am I to have to give it back? And the weird thing about this one is that I was really sad to give it back, but also I couldn't wait to stop using it, which is a bit strange. And that's probably because it's a really niche phone that might appeal to a very specific group of people. It's exciting, but it also has a lot of shortcomings and setbacks. So that makes it even more niche. Someone who works in construction, who isn't hugely into technology, might enjoy having a really thick, rugged phone with a massive battery life that they can throw around, that can get dusty, and in theory, other than this button, should be able to stand up to that punishment. I'm pretty sure that's just my model. I wouldn't, assume that every phone's going to break like that. It's not coming back. Likewise, if you are someone who hikes and explores and adventures and you want a phone like this, then this could be really useful. And some of the modules could be handy, maybe the walkie-talkie, certainly the battery pack in that scenario. Likewise, it's useful as a backup phone if you want something that's tough and that's going to last a long time. If you happen to be going on a camping trip, even if you're not like an adventurer type or an explorer. But most people aren't going to want a phone this big. The shortcomings are a nuisance, it can be a pain to use. So I really wouldn't recommend this to the majority of people, and like I say, certainly no one with a small pocket or small hands. But like I say, I loved reviewing it, it was tons of fun, and I think Doogee deserves some credit for trying something different and being inventive. So that's the Doogee S90, something really different and really interesting, and whilst it might not be the best phone in the world, it did make me feel a bit like James Bond for a little bit. So I like it, don't necessarily buy it. I hope you found this video useful and interesting. If you did, then please share it around, please leave a like, comment down below, let me know what you think of this thing, maybe what other modules you'd like to see. And check out the full review over at AndroidAuthority.com, where you can also find tons of news, features, dev posts, all the usual stuff, because we are your source for all things Android.